Gentlemen, it started with a whisper over breakfast, the kind of whisper that sounds soft but carries weight. She looked at me with that mix of concern and love only a woman who truly knows you can give. "Please," she said, "stop adding that to your tea." Her voice trembled slightly, not out of anger, but out of fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone you love is slowly losing themselves to a habit they can't even see. You see, I used to think my morning tea was sacred, that it was my ritual of calm before chaos. The world could be falling apart, but as long as I had that steaming cup, I was in control. Or at least I thought I was, but sometimes what we think brings us peace is quietly robbing us of it. Sometimes the smallest habit, a teaspoon-sized choice, can define the direction of our days, our relationships, even our destiny. That 1 teaspoon wasn't sugar, not really. It was comfort. It was the illusion of control. It was the little dose of denial I mixed in every morning to keep from facing myself. And that's what this message is truly about, not about tea, but about truth. Every ritual begins with good intentions. We crave a sense of calm, a moment to breathe before the world demands our energy, but there's a fine line between self-soothing and self-sabotage. That teaspoon I stirred in each morning wasn't helping me wake up. It was helping me hide from the hard conversations. Hide from the discipline I owed myself. Hide from the man I once promised I'd become. Complacency doesn't arrive as chaos. It seeps in quietly, disguised as routine. The habits that comfort us can easily become the habits that confine us. When my wife asked me to stop, she wasn't asking me to give up tea. She was asking me to wake up. When I finally paused long enough to listen, not to her words, but to what they were trying to protect, I realized something. I wasn't addicted to the taste, or the ritual, or even the caffeine. I was addicted to escape. I was using my morning tea as a delay, a way to postpone facing the silence in my own reflection. And that's what so many of us do, isn't it? We fill our cups, our days, our lives with distractions. We sip on comfort when we should be drinking from courage. The problem isn't the tea, it's what we refuse to taste in ourselves. It's easy to point at habits and call them harmless, but if they're keeping you numb, they're not harmless, they're anchors. Every teaspoon you stir in denial weighs you down just a little more, until one day you look up and realize you're too heavy to rise. The morning she asked me to stop, I didn't, not that day. Change doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in the decision that follows the moment. The next day, when I stood before that same cup, I held the teaspoon in my hand a little longer. I watched the reflection in the tea, the same face, the same eyes, but a different awareness staring back. That's when I realized the truth. I didn't need to stop adding something to my tea. I needed to start adding something to my life. Discipline, honesty, awareness, that was the missing ingredient all along. So I put down the teaspoon, not as an act of sacrifice, but as an act of love. For myself, for the woman who believed I could be better, for the man I was trying to remember how to be. Today, when I sip my morning tea, it tastes different. Not because of what's in it, but because of who's holding it. It tastes like awakening. It tastes like self-respect. It tastes like freedom, and maybe that's what life really is, one long, sacred ritual of choices. Each day, we decide what will stir into our moments, comfort or growth, denial or discipline, numbness or truth. The teaspoon may seem small, but the impact is vast, so if there's something, a habit, a thought, a pattern that your soul has been begging you to stop adding to your cup, listen. Not because someone told you to, but because deep down you already know. What you stir in your tea becomes what you live in your life. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop and start again with awareness. It begins innocently enough, a small comfort, a soothing ritual, a harmless act repeated day after day. You tell yourself it's nothing, that everyone has their own little indulgence. You even defend it when questioned, because to you, it's sacred. It's the teaspoon of comfort that sweetens the bitterness of life. But what you don't see, what you don't want to see, is how that teaspoon begins to thicken, how the comfort it brings begins to harden into a quiet complacency. It doesn't come with alarms or warnings. It comes softly, disguised as peace, as self, care, as something you deserve after long days and silent battles. You believe you're treating yourself, when in truth you're teaching yourself to settle. That's how complacency wins, not through confrontation, but through convenience. It doesn't demand that you stop moving. It only asks that you move a little less. It doesn't ask you to give up your dreams. It just convinces you that tomorrow is a better time to chase them. You wake up, stir your cup, and before you know it, that single moment of comfort becomes the reason you no longer challenge yourself. You're not resting anymore, you're rusting. The same small pleasure that once energized you now sedates your spirit. We love comfort because it feels like control. It gives us predictability in a world that often feels chaotic. But comfort has a dark side. It whispers you're fine. Even when you're not, it numbs the call to grow. It blinds you to the urgency of your own potential. That's the danger of complacency. It makes mediocrity feel acceptable. You stop noticing how far you've drifted from the edge of your ambition because the water feels warm where you are. When I think about that teaspoon, I see more than sugar or habit. I see the moments I let life pass by in exchange for ease. I see the conversations I avoided because they made me uncomfortable, the chances I didn't take because failure felt too risky, the dreams I postponed because the routine was too convenient. Each of those moments was a stir of complacency. Each one sweetened the illusion that I was okay standing still. And that's the thing, comfort isn't evil, but it's deceptive. It gives you just enough satisfaction to keep you from seeking transformation. Sometimes we mistake peace for progress. We convince ourselves that because nothing is wrong, everything must be right. But peace without purpose is just stillness, and stillness, if it lasts too long, becomes stagnation. That teaspoon of comfort doesn't just calm your nerves, it quiets your hunger, and once your hunger is gone, so is your drive, your edge, your fire. The dreams you once chased begin to fade, not because they were impossible, but because you stopped believing they were urgent. And the truth is, life doesn't take away your greatness in one sweep. It takes it away in teaspoons. Every time you say, "It's okay, I'll do it tomorrow," every time you choose ease over effort, every time you settle for comfort instead of challenge, the erosion is slow, but it's certain. One day you wake up and realize the man or woman you've become is half the person you once imagined. And it all started with that harmless little ritual, that daily dose of good enough. But the moment you recognize it, everything can change. Because awareness shatters complacency, the same teaspoon that numbed you can also wake you, if you choose to stir awareness instead of avoidance. Comfort will always tempt you, but growth demands courage, and courage often tastes bitter at first sip. Yet, it's that bitterness that brings strength, that shakes you awake, that reminds you life isn't meant to be lived halfway. The teaspoon of comfort will always be there, waiting, inviting. But the question you must ask yourself is, what is it costing you each time you take a sip? It's easy to blame the cup, to point to what's inside it, the sugar, the caffeine, the ritual, and say, that's the problem. It gives you something tangible to hold accountable, something you can see, something you can change. But the truth is, the addiction rarely lives in what you consume. It lives in what you avoid. The real addiction isn't what's in the cup. It's what's missing in the mirror. That silent space where you're supposed to meet yourself, honestly, completely, without filters or distractions. That's where most people look away. That's where I used to look away. We become addicted not to things, but to escapes. We chase sensations that keep us from feeling the truth. We build small rituals around our pain so we don't have to face it. For some, it's the morning tea. For others, it's scrolling, noise, busyness, anything that fills the silence. Because silence has a way of forcing you to confront the emptiness inside it, and that emptiness is terrifying when you've spent years pretending it doesn't exist. The addiction hides behind productivity, too. You tell yourself you're just trying to stay balanced, that everyone needs a release, that your habits are harmless. But what if they're not? What if they're the very thing keeping you disconnected from yourself? Every time you reach for that cup, that screen, that distraction, you're not soothing your soul, you're silencing it. You're covering up the very voice that's been begging you to listen. I used to think I couldn't start my day without my cup. That it gave me clarity, energy, focus, but what it really gave me was a momentary pause, a temporary illusion of control. It wasn't about the drink, it was about avoiding the discomfort of facing the man in the mirror before he became the version he wanted to be. I realized that I wasn't addicted to what I was adding to my tea. I was addicted to not having to look at myself long enough to admit what needed to change. And isn't that how most of us live? We call it routine, but it's really refuge. We call it comfort, but it's really camouflage. We convince ourselves that our little indulgences are expressions of self-love, when deep down, they're shields of protection from the rawness of self-awareness. Because when you truly look at yourself without excuses, without defenses, you have to acknowledge what's missing: the discipline, the fire, the honesty, the alignment between who you are and who you promised yourself you'd become. There's a loneliness in realizing you've been absent from your own life. That you've been physically present but emotionally disconnected. That you've been showing up for everything except yourself. You sip the same drink, you move through the same motions, but you're numb, you're surviving on autopilot. And that's what addiction really is: the unconscious repetition of avoidance. It's not about pleasure, it's about protection. It's the body's way of saying, I'm not ready to feel this yet. But the mirror doesn't lie. No matter how long you avoid it, it waits. It waits for the day you stop blaming the contents of your cup and start confronting the contents of your soul. The day you stop asking, what am I consuming? And start asking, what am I neglecting? Because in that reflection lies the truth, not about what you drink or do, but about what you've stopped believing in yourself. When you finally look, really look, something shifts. You begin to see that the addiction was never about needing more. It was about fearing less. Fearing less silence, less vulnerability, less truth. You realize that what's missing in the mirror isn't perfection, it's presence. The willingness to meet yourself where you are, without needing to escape. And when that happens, when you finally allow yourself to face what's missing instead of masking it, you find something greater than any comfort could offer. You find yourself. Not the version that performs, not the version that hides behind rituals or routines, but the version that breathes freely, the one that no longer needs to add anything to feel complete. That's when the addiction loses its power, because you no longer need the cup to fill you. You've already filled what was missing in the mirror. Change doesn't arrive like a storm. It begins quietly, often in a moment so small you almost miss it. A flicker of thought, a pause before habit, a single breath where you hesitate long enough to see yourself differently. That's how awareness enters, not with noise, but with noticing. One small stir, and the stillness of your routine begins to ripple. That's when transformation begins, not because the world around you changes, but because you finally start to see it, and yourself as it truly is. For the longest time, I believed change required something dramatic. A grand declaration, a breaking point, a collapse. But now I understand that real change begins long before the breakdown. It starts in awareness, in that fragile space between what you've always done and what you suddenly realize you no longer want to do. It starts when you catch yourself in the act of repetition and, for the first time, ask why. That question alone is the first act of rebellion against the old version of you. The morning I chose to pause before adding that teaspoon to my tea, nothing around me looked different. The sun still rose, the kettle still whistled, the air still smelled of routine, but inside something shifted. I was watching myself, not judging, not condemning, just observing. And in that act of gentle noticing, I saw the truth that my habits were not automatic, they were chosen. That the comfort I kept returning to wasn't inevitable. It was a decision I had been making unconsciously for years. Awareness doesn't demand that you change overnight. It simply hands you the power of choice. The danger of living without awareness is that life turns into a loop. You repeat the same emotions, the same mistakes, the same